This program was recorded on Monday, April the 16th, in the year of our Lord 2018. The opinions expressed by the participants in the following program do not necessarily represent that of this station or its management.
Or anybody else.
From the John DeVita Recording Studio, located in an undisclosed and clandestine location on the great northwest side of our fair city of Chicago, we once again are pleased to be presenting yet another edition of our monthly roundtable panel discussion show, Meet the Chicago Historians. Now here's the guy who started it all, John DeVita.
Well, thank you very much, Rich Lang, from the John DeVita Broadcast Center. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another broadcast of Meet the Chicago Historians on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, April the 16th, the year 2018. Today, the panel will be talking about history of our income tax in the USA. What a subject. And now, sit back and enjoy Meet the Chicago Historians. And to start today's broadcast, here is our announcer, Mr. Richard Lang.
And now I'll pass it over to our panel moderator. Now I'll pass it over to our panel moderator for today, John Kochelko.
Thank you very much, Rich. Thank you very much. It's good to be here with you. And let me begin by saying that our regular moderator, Jack Red Ryan, the red does not reflect his political point of view, cannot be here with us today. He had planned to be here, but unforeseen family circumstances made it impossible. So I'm sitting in. I'm glad to be here with you as we meet on the first day of the second half of the month of April, the 16th of April. And we're right in the midst of income tax season, although this year income taxes are not formally due until tomorrow. The 17th is the day this year. But we're going to be talking about income tax and many other topics. But before we do that, we'll go around this eminent table of ours and let each of our panelists introduce themselves. And I'll start with the man to my left, who certainly is noteworthy as having one of the finest voices for radio anywhere, Rich Lang. Rich?
Thank you, John.
Now cut that out.
Well, I'm your announcer, Rich Lang. I've got a little bit of background teaching American and European history at the college level. I was a long-time disciple of Ken Little, who got me interested in Chicago history, especially neighborhood history. And now I pass it over to my left.
Across the hall. Don Peter. I'm a member of the Fire Museum of Greater Chicago, and I do work on their trucks. Sometimes I even fix them. And that's about it.
Tom McKenna, a retired Chicago police officer. And as John was speaking about our regular moderator, well, he's going under the name of Jack Red Ryan now, but I knew him as John when we were growing up. He invited me to join the group, I guess it's a few years ago. And as I always say, I'm a lifelong friend of John's and one of the few people who will actually admit to that. And across the table from me
is Bill Kugelman. I'm a retired Chicago fire chief of many years, and also was the president of the Fire Museum of Greater Chicago, of which I will invite everyone listening to the open house that we will have, 5218 Southwestern, on the 28th of April, which is the fourth Saturday of the month. We're open from 10 to 2, and you are welcome. We have a new library open up on the second floor of this old firehouse, and it is dedicated, like I say, to Ken Little, and it contains the history of the Chicago Fire Department. While I'm on that, and I'm the last one here, I guess, I have a big gripe, and I wish everyone in the listening audience in Chicago would get out and take a look at the hydrant by their house, by their block, and see if it's, for one thing, see if it's painted red. A lot of them, they're faded so much they're pink. And I've been asked if that was for the women firefighters to use. The city just is not taking care of them.
That's a good question. You don't want to offend anyone with a pink fire hydrant.
No. But the big thing with them, and I spent 46 years on this job, is that they're so low, they should be higher. A lot of them are covered with, during the summer and the fall, with bushes and so forth. During the winter with snow, and they should be higher. Some of them are so low you driving a car you just can't see, and you park in front of it and not even knowing that it's there. So contact your alderman, contact your city people, contact the mayor's office, and see if we can't get those hydrants put back into the shape that they were in some time ago. They, if you have a fire in your neighborhood, in your building, the only way to put it out is with water. And you got to get those hydrants back in shape. That's my gripe to my, we got John. Come on, John, what's your
Reminds me
background?
of those editorials where they say, and this was one man's opinion, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Bill. And let me just add an additional plug for the Fire Museum. It is well worth a visit. We did a show there. John was just our executive producer, John DeVita, was reminding us in 2011. We did a show there in September of that year. And in fact, it was while we were doing that remote show from the Fire Museum that we learned that the man who founded the station on which we originally appeared, Mr. Joseph J. Gentile, passed away the very day we were doing our remote broadcast from the Chicago Fire Museum. So it's well worth the trip, and take advantage of it and visit the Fire Museum. Much interesting memorabilia there about the fire department and the fire service. And John has mentioned to us we may be doing a remote broadcast in the future this summer, but we'll have more on that in the months ahead. But we may be getting out of our undisclosed, underground, heavily reinforced bunker from which we do our broadcast regularly here. This is an undisclosed location, as John said,
yes,
on the northwest side, and we're not going to be more specific than that. But we may be venturing out. It's always, our eyes blink when we come out from underground, but we may be actually venturing above ground like the groundhog and doing a remote broadcast during the summer months. And I think just mentioning summer may be beneficial for people since we're in this miserable spell of weather. It looks more like February the 16th outside today as we're broadcasting. There is snow on the ground. It's been in the 30s, wind chills in the 20s. This is despicable weather that we have been having, and I think probably everyone in the Chicago metropolitan area is thoroughly tired of it by now. So hopefully by next month, we may actually be in something resembling spring.
Well, this is now, John, the new word that's out is sprinter.
Sprinter.
Sprinter, yeah.
Combination of spring and winter.
Exactly.
Or else tomorrow it might be 94 degrees.
Well,
yeah.
And there's the other old joke that in Chicago there are two seasons, winter and August. So
John, before I forget it, you mentioned Joe Gentile. When I was watching the great success of Loyola University's basketball team making it to the Final Four,
yes,
and I'm sure John thought about it too. It sure would have been great if Joe was around to witness the that great run that they had. That was talk about a Cinderella story. I mean, in case you were living under a rock and don't know what I'm talking about, Loyola University here in Chicago made it to the Final Four in the college basketball.
I think Sister Jean got more attention than the
Than-
actual
than
game.
all the other players and teams combined.
And Joe was a great benefactor of for Loyola University and St. Ignatius too. I know. Did you think the same thing, Jan, when you were watching some of those games that Joe would have really enjoyed?
Joe would be jumping up and down in his casket right now
Yeah.
because he was quite an.
Yeah, right.
And as I had mentioned several times before, many times he would call me up and tell me, come get me, and I had to go all the way back to the studios, get in his car with him and Oscar, that young man that lives with me upstairs. We would go to Loyola on Sheridan Road, and boy, when we walked in there, you think the President of the United States walked into the place. Everybody came over and said hello to him, shook his hand, and even the sister came up and talked to us, and we had seats right on the floor, right. They call them the Coca-Cola seats, and Joe would be just so happy to know that his Ramblers really did a great job this year.
Yeah, that was really great.
Yes, it was. It was.
I know at our old location at the old studio at the old WJJG radio, there were photographs there of him being honored at Loyola. I think they had special ceremonies at which he was saluted by Loyola for all of his fundraising and support.
Everybody was cheered for that. I mean, I went to DePaul. I think you went to DePaul, and but it doesn't really matter what local school you were from. Everybody was cheering for Loyola in that game.
Well, I'm actually something of an alumnus of Loyola. I did graduate study at Loyola
Yeah,
after
there
I
you go.
finished my work at
Okay.
DePaul, so I've got a foot in both camps, and I was glad to see that. And they went much further than anyone
Oh, yeah,
imagined
right.
that they
Oh,
would.
yes.
To get into the Final Four, they did a tremendous achievement. So we're very glad for.
It came at a perfect time too, because none of the other sports teams in Chicago were really doing anything. So they
What else is new?
That filled the gap
Right.
for a team to cheer for.
And that was a big gap to fill too, Tom.
yeah, you're right.
I'm very happy for Loyola, and I wish them all the best for next year.
Well-
Maybe next year they'll go all the way.
I'm sure Joe was looking down from above.
Oh yes, I know he was.
Very good. Well, we're well into our first half hour of our April show, and we're going to be talking a little bit later about income tax, but customarily we spend the first half hour at least of the show talking about news and current events or any special items that anyone wishes to raise. So I suppose one of the big items that's been in the news was this bombardment of Syria last week. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? We hit and destroyed a chemical weapons facility, which they're now claiming only was producing pharmaceuticals. It was only producing aspirin and
Right.
bandages, and had no huge complex there that had no military significance.
The best sound bite I heard about that is Obama drew a line in the sand and Trump fired some missiles over it.
So we've had some of that in
It's
the
about
news.
time. It's about time that somebody came up with that set of balls to do something that should have been done a long time ago.
Well, plus,
It's,
I mean, when Great Britain and France joined us in that movement, I know, especially when you get France on board.
Oh
you
yeah.
know, but it was more of a humanitarian effort than anything. I mean, chemical warfare. I
Yeah.
mean, you talk about the most devastating thing that you can do. I mean, the pain and suffering that inflicts on human. I mean, so I look at it more not the, in the sense of the United States. I look at it more in the sense of a humanitarian worldwide effort.
If they did it and there was nothing done about it, what would other countries start in on? And the end of World War I, they agreed no more of this chemical stuff.
Right.
Evidently they didn't follow history.
That's the interesting historical tie-in, because what they used was chlorine gas. Chlorine was the first poison gas used in the First World War. In 1915, 103 years ago, the Germans unleashed chlorine gas on the Western Front.
Right. And what
And-
countries lost the most people is England and France.
Sure, because they were the victims of this.
They were, yeah.
Fortunately, the Germans did not know how to it was a brand new weapon. They didn't use it very effectively. It didn't gain for them the immediate victory because they were looking for something that was going to break the stalemate already in 1915, and they didn't follow up on it. But in any event, it was the first poison gas used, and now here we are a century later, and you have a dictator using it against his own people. And it was certainly worthwhile to see them go in and punish them for it.
He was using it against his own.
Right.
That's what mystifies everyone. Is there a civil war? I guess there is.
Oh, God. They've killed a huge percentage of the population has either died or has left the country just to get away from this.
Right.
Syria is becoming just a land of wreckage and ruins because of all the weaponry, and the Russians are supplying them with it.
Right, and the Russians, their response to, how could you defend something like that? So their response was, well, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
How could you possibly defend using chemical weapons, especially on your own people?
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I will admit, as I was sitting watching the news and watching all that nonsense that was going on over there, you and me and all of us sitting in the studios, okay, we're like has-beens. But the ones I feel so sorry for were those poor little kids. It was just a shame. Those kids don't even know what the word life means. And here they are. Some of them are dead. Some of them were just, you saw them that they were taking hoses and washing their bodies and putting the inhalators on them and all that. Those are the people you have to feel sorry for. And that guy that did that, they should hang him out to dry and put a fire under his rear end and let him burn and let him know what it feels like to suffer.
Well, it just goes to show if a dictator is willing to kill unlimited numbers of his own people, he can stay in power. There's no question the majority of the people have wanted him out. But if you have an army that's willing to keep shooting and is willing to keep killing wholesale the people of your own country, you can perpetuate yourselves in power. Everybody thought he was on the ropes a couple of years ago, and perhaps if the United States had made a strong effort then, but we didn't. When he was on the ropes, he could have been pushed out.
But
we let him off.
His father started a lot of this too.
Yeah, he's the second generation. Yeah. It's like North Korea. It's a family business.
Mm-hmm. Right, and now that Russia is backing him, it's going to be extremely difficult to get him out of power.
And they've been even his father was a stooge for the Soviet Union. He was an ally of the Kremlin way from the time they came to power back in the 1970s. This government's been in there since the 1970s.
I wonder about, in the military thinking, if some argued for, if you're going to strike Syria again to remove the poisonous chemical weapons, why not finish the job? Wipe them all out as much as possible instead of another fairly limited strike, which seems to have been the case last week. So Assad, for years, perhaps could be kept from using poisonous gas again or weapons.
I think the problem with getting rid of Assad, the boat has already sailed on that. We could have done it probably at a very low cost 4 or 5 years ago when the uprising began. But that's when Obama stepped back and decided not to do anything. Now, he's essentially gotten rid of virtually everybody that was fighting against. They're either dead or they're in exile. And to get involved now, you could probably go in and destroy his air force, but he still has troops. As long as he has troops on the ground with rifles that are willing to shoot, he can keep himself in power.
And that would create a vacuum where the other countries would start fighting, trying to fill up the vacuum.
Problem too. Yeah.
So
it's a mess.
It's an unfortunate situation. What else do we have? We have the last night's interview with Mr. Comey was very much in the news. We've got the income tax we're going to be talking about a little bit later. Any other topics that anybody else would like to raise?
Who appointed Comey? Was it Obama?
Obama made him director of the FBI.
Yeah, he did. It was Obama.
He's been around since the Obama administration.
Yeah, okay.
He had positions under George W. Bush. I think he was a deputy attorney general.
This is like what was he doing? The director of the FBI. Is it appointing, Joe Blow. Evidently, this guy is just.
Well, I know J. Edgar Hoover is spinning in his grave. You know, all he did.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
bring that organization
He
up.
ruled that organization with a very tight fist, and now their reputation is I mean it's sunk.
Yeah.
You know, which is unfortunate. But
I toured the FBI building many years ago when I was in Washington, and at that time they had a sort of a shrine to J. Edgar Hoover. They had his desk and his memorabilia. There was a large exhibit, I think, on the second floor of the building. And the building, of course, it's the J. Edgar Hoover FBI building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that organization was a mess when he took it over, and he brought it back up. I mean, almost to untouchable type status.
And you know, the other thing is, it had a reputation for being sort of a political patronage operation in the 20s and before Hoover took over. And one thing, I don't think anyone has ever accused the FBI that it ever got involved in partisan politics under Hoover. I mean, he served Democrat presidents, Republican presidents. There was never any partisan politics involved in it.
Yeah, he knew that information was king, and he had it. He had the information on everybody.
Yeah.
I went through the building too, and with a group, and a gal that I used to go with was an agent, and the big joke there was, when are they going to put his dress up?
Yeah.
You know, when are they because of his past inequities.
Well, my favorite story about him was the one that Alvin Karpis, one of the most wanted in the 1930s, who was on the run. And he somehow got word to the newspapers that if J. Edgar Hoover showed his face in whatever city it was, he might have been in Detroit, I'm not sure what city it was, that he would kill J. Edgar Hoover. And so J. Edgar Hoover, who had never made an arrest in his life, he was an attorney. He was with the Justice Department, but he had never been a street police officer. Hoover, when they located him, Hoover flew out personally.
Right.
And he was there leading when they surrounded him. And what Karpis heard was, "Karpis, I'm J. Edgar Hoover. You're under arrest."
Yeah.
Was the only arrest in his career that J. Edgar Hoover ever made in person, but he did make that one arrest of Alvin Karpis.
You know, while we're on the subject of current events, I don't know if anyone saw the headlines in the Sun-Times, the Sunday Sun-Times. It said something to the effect of it all started with the N-word. Did you see this?
Yeah.
They're talking about the shooting incident that happened in Mount Greenwood.
Right.
It's been over a year, I believe. And, you know, there's not many police officers that I know that are big fans of the media, but this is just, to put something like that, race baiting and igniting and fueling racial hatred. It's disgraceful. To describe that incident, and it was in bold headlines. I mean, it took up almost the whole top of the page. It all started with the N-word, you know, because racism had something to do with this. The shooting itself, racism had absolutely nothing to do with it. What had a great deal to do with it was stupidity. The person that got shot, the black man that got shot, let me just give you a very brief the background on what happened. There was a funeral. It was a black man that got shot in the head, I think in, I don't know, I'm going to say St. Louis, but he was buried in Chicago. The funeral procession, I guess, was leaving the cemetery, and there were about 4 or 5 cars with blacks in the cars. Supposedly, someone made a comment using the F word, some white person in Mount Greenwood. They stopped, the blacks stopped their cars, and they got in a confrontation with I believe was an off-duty firefighter originally,
right,
a firefighter paramedic, and then an off-duty police officer, and then another off-duty police officer. They identified themselves as police officers.
They were blocking the firehouse there.
Right, and the reason that the firefighter got involved is when the cars pulled over, they were blocking the entrance to and exit of the firehouse on 111th. So I guess they made some comment about move your cars, and it escalated from there. But here's what happened. One of the occupants of one of the vehicles, when the police officers drew their weapons and identified themselves as police officers, he drew his weapon, pointed it at the police officers, and there is a photograph of this in a combat aggressive stance, and said, "Hey, you ain't the only MFs out here with a gun." And guess what? They shot him and killed him. And you point a gun at a police officer. What's the alternative?
People are under the misapprehension that the police officer has to wait for the other guy to shoot first before he can open fire. But that's not the case.
No, but the whole problem is the Sun-Times boiled that whole incident down to it all started with the N-word. And also, the media at the time, I remember this, they interviewed, they love to interview the bad guys' mothers. And she said, my son didn't have a gun. My son didn't own a gun. Well, the gun, I guess, was registered to him. And there is a very excellent photograph, because now, in the cell phone age, everybody's got a camera. And there was a photograph of this guy in a combat stance, pointing his weapon at the police officers. But that's all boiled down to it all started with the N-word. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, you talk about fanning the flames. I mean, how about it all started when someone pointed a gun at a police officer? How about that? Wouldn't that be a little bit more accurate description of what took place?
No, you're absolutely right.
And then
Tom.
before I forget it, the photograph and that they had on the front pages of Sun-Times, that firefighter paramedic is administering CPR to the guy that
He's helping
got
the guy.
shot.
That's right. Trying to help him. Yeah.
He's administering CPR mouth to mouth to this guy in the street, and that's on the front page. So I mean, isn't that like where's he was actually? I think he was the only white guy in the photo, and he's administering CPR to a black man, and that they put that headline on there. I mean, it's disgraceful.
Absolutely. No, some of these things that have happened might have happened because the guy was just escaping from robbing a store, or like this, this whole racial thing has gotten way
There was a guy that did a study from Harvard University, not exactly the bastion of conservative studies, and he said, the stuff about white police officers killing black men, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
And he went through and he did all the statistics. And he said it isn't happening.
But the media creates an image. The media creates a story, and then they massage the facts to fit the story, to fit their interpretation of what's going on. That's why, I don't know about you, but I'm spending less time watching the national media, the national networks. For years, I spent a lot of time watching the news, watching the Sunday morning interview shows, and I just don't waste my time anymore because it's essentially just propaganda. It's no longer. They're no longer news gatherers. They're participants in they're trying to shape the debate their way.
And one of the things I think that's so upsetting to liberals in the mainstream media is there is alternative shows, alternative television shows, alternative radio shows, alternative. When I was growing up, I mean, we had William Buckley Jr. and Sapphire and the National Review, but that was about it.
But you had three networks, and they were all left of center. They all leaned toward the Democrats, and they had a monopoly. I mean, there was nowhere else to go. Now you've got, at least you have Fox, which leans in a different direction, but they still have the three networks. They've got CNN, they've got MSNBC. PBS makes a little bit of an effort to be a little more even-handed than the others do, but they complain about they're always down on Fox. It's as if it just sticks in their craw that there's one network out there that isn't left wing. That isn't presenting.
Well, that's
the news
like
the
they
way
say.
they-
You know, we welcome all opinions until they find out that someone actually has a different opinion, and then we don't want that.
They will defend to the death your right to
Yeah,
agree with
right.
them.
I mean, there's no conservative students or student organizations shouting down liberal speakers.
Okay, well, we've kind of scratched the surface. This is the first half hour of our Meet the Chicago Historians, and we'll be right back.
We'll be right back after these messages of interest and importance.
Hello, friends. Do you need new tires for your vehicle? How are the brakes? Are they in good condition? How's your front wheel alignment? Do you need your tires rotated? How are the shocks and struts? Do you need an oil and grease change? How about a tune-up? When was the last time you had your engine tuned up? How about the wiper blades? Are they nice, sharp blades to clean off the rain and snow? How are the headlights, tail lights, stop lights, turn directional signals? Are all the bulbs working? How's your cooling system and the exhaust system? How about your battery? Does that need to be upgraded? How about the belts and hoses? Fuel injectors, timing belt and chain, and the air conditioning. Is that all working properly? Well, if you need any maintenance work done on your vehicle, go to Grand Tire and Auto Service, which is located at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago. They are on Grand Avenue on the north side of the street, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue. You can't miss the building. There's a big Goodyear sign right on top of the building. Or you can call area code 773-622-4361. Don, Chris, or Ken will be more than happy to assist you and to help you with any questions you might have about the maintenance on your vehicle. Their hours are Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 7 o'clock in the evening. Saturday from 7:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And even on Sunday from 9:30 in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So once again, for any maintenance work you might need on your vehicle, go to Grand Tire and Auto Supply. Once again, their address is at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue on the north side of the street. And their phone number is area code 773-622-4361. They have great service. Their mechanics are all certified mechanics, and they do quality work. Now, I've been going to Grand Tire with my vehicle since 1985, right up until this present day. So once again, Grand Tire and Auto Service at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago. Their phone number is 773-622-4361. Don, Chris, and Ken will be more than happy to help you and to advise you on any maintenance work you might need on your vehicle. So once again, Grand Tire and Auto Service at 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue on the north side of the street. You can't miss the building because there's a big Goodyear sign on the top of the building. That's Grand Tire and Auto Service, 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, and their phone number is area code 773-622-4361. For quality service, it's Grand Tire Auto Service, 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, 773-622-4361. 4361. You will be completely satisfied with the work that they do.
Now back to our discussion. John?
Thank you very much, Rich. And welcome back to our second half hour. We're here again. This is the 16th of April in the year of our Lord 2018. Income tax day is tomorrow. Quick bit of information for you. Ordinarily, taxes are due on the 15th of April, but the 15th falls on a Sunday, and whenever the 15th falls on a Sunday, it's deferred until Monday. However, there is a holiday of some sort in Washington, D.C. It's the equivalent of a state holiday, but it is a holiday in the District of Columbia, and I frankly don't know what that holiday is, but for that reason, it's deferred until tomorrow. So tomorrow, Tuesday, the 17th of April, is the final date for filing of federal income taxes. I hope everyone has already filed their federal income taxes. And we're going to talk about income tax today. Jack Ryan had called me to tell me that would be our theme. It's interesting that last Thursday, April the 12th, marked the beginning of the Civil War. The Civil War began on the morning of April the 12th, 1861, when the Southerners opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor of South Carolina. At 4:30 in the morning, in fact, that the Civil War began. And I mention that because the first income tax in the United States was levied during the Civil War. It was levied as a fundraising measure for the Civil War. It started out at a rate of 3%, and by the end of the war, it had been raised to what appears to have been just a flat rate of 10% on incomes. It took effect in 1863 and outlasted the war. The Congress did not eliminate it until 1872. In that time, they collected about $250 million. They collected about $350 billion over the 10 years, $350 million during the years that it was in effect. But it was kind of end-loaded. During the Civil War, it only brought in a little over $50 million. So it was not a significant fundraising effort for the war itself. It was intended to fund the war, but produced relatively little. The interesting thing is that it was almost certainly unconstitutional. The federal Constitution banned any tax of that sort unless it was properly apportioned amongst the states by population. The original Constitution banned what they called any direct tax that was not proportional among the states based on the census population, which is almost impossible to do. And consequently, there had never been an income tax until then. And this income tax was not proportional among the states, but the courts kind of upheld it. And for that reason, Congress essentially got away with it until they decided it was just too unpopular. There was too much griping and complaining about it, and they let it lapse in 1872. They brought it back in 1894. They levied a 2% income tax in 1894 because tariff revenues were going down. And for much of our country, it's been in the news recently about Donald Trump, levying additional tariffs on the Chinese and steel imports and so forth. For most of our history, tariffs were the main form of revenue for the federal government. Tariff revenues had gone down, and the government needed some way to fill the coffers, and someone in Washington said, aha, remember that income tax we had during the Civil War? Let's try that again. Well, this time it got slapped down. This time the Supreme Court ruled that it was indeed unconstitutional to levy a tax of this type. So it only lasted for 2 years before it was knocked out by the courts. This started a movement in the country to change the Constitution because government wanted more money. And finally, in 1909, an amendment was proposed that would have authorized a federal income tax and not required it to be apportioned amongst the states. And it worked its way through the states, and it finally was ratified in 1913. And as soon as it was ratified, Congress immediately leveled the income tax, which we have known ever since. So we've had an income tax now continuously in our nation's history since 1913. And interestingly, the first federal income tax was 1%. 1%. But there was a surtax. If your income was above a certain level, they would add on an additional 1% or 2 or 3 or up to 6%. So I always like to say Henry Ford, under that first income tax, would have paid a top rate of 7%. That was the top rate on the federal income tax in those years, 7%. World War I comes along, and obviously the government needs money, and they remembered how it had been used as a fundraiser in the Civil War. So government, now that they have it in effect and it's constitutional, they start jacking the rate higher and higher and higher. And they came up in the First World War with a base rate of 12% and a surtax for the rich, what we now call the super rich, what is Bernie Sanders always railing against the rich? That went up to 65%.
Ooh.
So Henry Ford, I'm just using Henry Ford as an example. He was arguably the richest man in the world. Henry Ford, who would have been paying 7% before the war, would now be paying a top rate of 77%. 11 times more than he had been paying before the war. War ends, government doesn't need all that money anymore. You might think it would go all the way back down to the 1%, 2%. No. The way the income tax, whenever the income tax goes up during a war or an emergency, it never goes back down again to what it had been before the war. So the Republicans come into power in the 20s. They do reduce the tax rates, but now the top tax rate was 20%. The base rate was 4%, so Henry Ford would have been paying 24% in the 1920s. Not the 77 he paid during the war, but it wouldn't go back to that little 7% figure that we had known in the early days of it. So what I'm trying to get across with this is that when government gets accustomed to that additional revenue, it never gives all of it up. It'll give some of it up, but government never shrinks back to what it was before the wartime emergency. And we've been dealing with it ever since. So I'll pause at this time and give an opportunity for everybody else to jump in.
Well, you know, the thing about income tax, and I just paid mine yesterday. I owe every year because my wife works and I'm retired, but I'm still working. So I fall into that category of rich people that Bernie Sanders always talks about. So I want you guys to realize, treat me with a little bit of respect because I'm actually rich. What bothered me about sending the check in is if what I was paying for was a good product, I really wouldn't mind so much. But you look at where our tax money goes, like in the city of Chicago, property taxes, it goes to education. Well, the sad part about that is my parents and me, I have 4 kids and 7 grandkids, but my kids never went to public school, and what the reason is because public school, the education was so inferior, and now, especially today, unfortunately, there's so much crime in public schools that most of the people that are in the higher tax brackets, although they are paying a great deal of money for public education, they are not availing themselves of it. They're sending their kids to private schools, basically Catholic schools. Another big portion goes to police departments. The crime is astronomical. I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is you're paying for something and you're not getting any. It's nerve-wracking. I forget what the latest statistic was. I think it's sometime, is it in May now, where you work, they say that you're working for the federal government up until a certain date that your money goes. I mean, isn't that kind of slavery?
If you figure all the taxes in, you're halfway through the year.
Last week, I think it was, I saw a single person living in the city of Chicago that makes let's say he makes $100,000 a year. He will pay with his income tax, which would probably be the 28% bracket, the state income tax, which is, let's just say 5%, is 4.9. And his property taxes, if he owns a reasonable piece of property, half of his salary goes to taxes, with income tax and property tax. Now, that's not including sales tax. So now we're getting up into the over 50% of your income is going to taxes. Now, on the other hand, the latest statistic I heard is there's approximately 50% of the people in this country pay no tax at all, no federal tax. So if I ever had a conversation with Bernie Sanders, I would ask him specifically, how much do you think the average person should be able to keep of their own money? I mean, I mean that legitimately. Should you be able to keep at least 50% of it, or should?
Well, people on the left seem to think that all the money you earn essentially belongs to the government, and the government will decide what percentage of your money they're willing to allow you to keep. But their attitude is that they've got a claim on as big of a percentage of it as they want. That they have a right to take as much of that money from you, so that they can spend it on things that they think are more worthwhile.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's so disappointing because, you know, you hear your whole life, you know, the study in school, you know, don't get involved in criminal activity, you know, get a good job, and then when you do that, you know, and they are taking so much money out of your paycheck, and you see people that aren't paying any taxes at all. It's very, you know, as a matter of fact, guess why Donald Trump got elected? A lot of people were just pure and simple fed up.
And there's an interesting thing. You know, it is true. You know, Mitt Romney, who had his failings as a candidate, but he got in a great deal of trouble for telling the truth. And if you're in politics, you know, you can certainly wind up in a real mess.
Oh,
if you tell the truth.
Definitely.
And he told the truth, which was that roughly 50% of the people in the United States are paying all the federal income taxes, and roughly 50% pay zero. And this was not always the case. It was that way in the early days when they first set the income tax up. The threshold at one point was like $3,000. Well, in those days, how many people made $3,000? It was that tax was levied on essentially people that were in the upper income. But it changed during the 1930s. It changed during the end of the New Deal, particularly during World War II. They dropped the exempt amount of income down to $600, $500 and $600. Everything over that was taxed, which meant that virtually everybody in the 40s and 50s was paying income tax. I always like to talk about an episode of The Honeymooners. Now, Ralph Cramden and Alice Cramden had to be at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder in this country. I mean, they lived in that crummy little apartment, had one room that you could see, which was their kitchen, their dining room, and their living room. They had one table and a couple of wooden chairs and a cabinet and an icebox. And they had a bedroom. You knew there was a bedroom somewhere, and a closet, and a bathroom, and that was it. I mean, there were. And Ralph Cramden was a bus driver. They used to joke he was making $37.50 a week. They did an episode of The Honeymooners in which Ralph gets a letter from the IRS that he made a mistake on his income tax. And the whole episode is about Ralph. You may remember this. Ralph and Norton and Alice are frantic about what's going to happen to him when he has to go to the IRS. Ralph Cramden was paying income tax in the 50s, which meant everybody was paying income tax in the 50s.
Right.
But that's changed as we've lowered the tax rates in more recent years. They've sweetened it by exempting more and more people, so that now we're at a stage where half the people in the country pay no income tax.
Right.
The federal income tax system is probably, I'm not going to say the greatest, but it ranks right up there, con job on the American people that I can imagine. Now, let me just say this. I'm going to bring a financial consultant in here, and he's going to sit there at the head of the table, and he's going to tell you this. He says, here's my program. At the beginning of the year, on January 1st, you're going to give me $10,000. The following year, I am going to give you 8,000 of that back. Great deal, huh? What? Are you out of your mind? Now, how many people do you say, how'd you do on taxes? Oh, I did great. I didn't have to pay. I got money back. I said, you didn't pay any income tax? No, I got money back. They want to argue with you.
Just because they get money back doesn't mean they didn't pay
Hello.
any taxes.
Yeah, hello.
Right.
Yeah,
Right, right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. If every person on April 15th had to sit down and write out a check, they paid no income tax all year
Which is
long.
the way it
You're
used
right.
to be.
Right,
Yeah.
and write out a check. You talk about the Million Man March on Washington.
Right.
Right.
There'd be 100 million men but again, it's a con job.
And
they
that-
take your money, and then they give you some of it back.
And you call it a refund.
You're thrilled to death.
And the interesting thing is, when I was reading up on the income tax, that was a wartime measure. 1943, they developed a new concept called withholding.
Yes, yes.
The
good
reason
point.
being, and it's understandable, in World War II, when the country was building the greatest war machine the world had ever seen, the government didn't just need money on April the 15th.
Right.
It needed money all year long. So they put in what they said was a wartime measure, that they were going to deduct this money from your paycheck. And actually, in World War II, they were willing to do whatever was necessary to
Right.
win the war and to defeat the Japanese and the Nazis.
Buying
So
bonds,
no one was going to question anything, and quite rightly. But when the war ended, did they do away with the withholding? No, it was too much too convenient for the government
That's right.
to just deduct this from. And as you say, if you had to sit down once a year and make
Exactly.
out a check, you would feel that burden. But by taking a little bit from you every week,
Right.
every 2 weeks, it doesn't have the same
Yeah.
impact.
Right.
Uh,
And you're
and
talking
the-
about right now checks. I understand that the government won't accept a check returned to them for not sufficient funds.
Wait, no.
What do you mean they won't accept it?
If you write up checks to the government, right?
Sure, you're paying your tax, yeah.
Right. Okay. If you don't have funds, they'll send the check back to them.
Well, that,
Yeah.
From what I understand, they won't let them do that. The bank has got to eat that and get it from you, which they have to do anyway.
well,
but
you have to. I mean, you have to pay your taxes. Yeah. I mean, if you don't have if you write a bad check, I can understand that.
And
But-
another group of people that get a very rude awakening about our income tax system is the millennials or the recent college graduates that say, "Wow, I'm going to be making $50,000 a year," in their single bracket, and then they get
Yeah.
their first check and
Yeah.
they go, "What the hell is this?"
Yeah.
Then they're not a Bernie Sanders supporter anymore.
I like these new TV ads that come and give us your tax return money, and we'll give you 10% off. And that, I mean, everybody's
Oh,
got
these-
an angle
yeah,
on,
yeah, yeah,
on
yeah,
that
yeah.
they'll
that,
give
that
you
thing.
your
and,
refund
and,
right now, but what they don't say, it's a loan.
Yeah,
You're
they're loan.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
and they don't you don't read the fine print of what percentage you're paying
Right.
that loan, what you're going to lose by.
Well, that's another thing about the media. They talk about all these tax preparation services and what a ripoff it is about the percentage that they take and the loans. Now, again, this is kind of like a let them eat cake type thing because the media is so out of touch. I agree. The interest rates are outrageous. It is a terrible, terrible situation. Now, if you have the repo man backing the tow truck up to your car, and you just walked up to your front door and there's an eviction notice on it, who are you going to get money from? Channel 7? Is Channel 7 going to give you a low interest loan?
Yeah.
That's the only place they're going to get it. So that's why they do it.
Yeah, no one thinks. I mean, I always say, if you're mugged on the street, are you going to call a reporter?
Right,
Exactly. Everybody loves the press is so compassionate toward everybody, but who is it? It's the cop that has to go out and actually defend your rights. But the bottom line is that so many of these things were done as wartime measures, and they're still with
repealed
us
after
decades and decades later.
You
Right.
know, John, you know that any time the government does something like that, they aren't going to wrap it up and forget about it.
Ronald Reagan used to say the most deadly words in English are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help you."
Exactly. Exactly. No, they prove that time after time after time. When they start something like that, and it'll only be for a year or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I had a friend of mine. He was a police officer, and the IRS hires. He was an accountant, and the IRS hires people in their busy season to do audits. And he said a very interesting thing. He says, Tom, the average guy, if you get a paycheck and they withhold tax out of it, you don't have a chance, really. I mean, let's say you fill out your tax return and you beat them out of every possible penny you can beat them out of. You stretch all your donations and you stretch the taxes. What are you talking about? $3,000-4,000, maybe $5,000, maybe $10,000. It's the cash businesses. That's the ones that are really, really beating them out of it, because they tell the federal government how much they made, through their receipts. And if you're in a cash business and you don't declare it, that's one of the reasons why all these small businesses are owned by immigrants. Middle Eastern immigrants. I mean, 7-Elevens and these fish houses and all these little shops and because it's a cash business, and naturally they couldn't care less about it's very patriotic to pay your taxes. Yeah, you're right.
You get in that same venue, they're having a big rangaboo about the census coming up. And about how, these aliens, they want them counted. Now, doesn't that go against what we're trying to do? But they want them counted to boost the census up, because that gives us federal money.
Well,
so you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
The difference between E.T., you saw the movie E.T., extraterrestrial?
Yeah.
The difference between E.T. and the average alien in the United States. E.T. learned how to speak English and he wanted to go home.
Yeah.
Instead of calling home, he texts home.
It's data. It was
But
called
I think
home.
the reason they're complaining about the census, they want more people because they want to increase their voting base.
Representation. Your House,
Yep.
your representation,
Yeah.
the House of Representatives is
Right.
based on population. And if you get an accurate count, and some of these states would lose their, this fake representation that they may have.
Oh, yeah. Well, in the last election, I had a laugh. You heard the term "hoist by your own petard." Dan Burke, the Democratic Party was encouraging Hispanics to register to vote. Guess what?
Bingo.
Chuy Garcia backed a Hispanic candidate in Dan Burke's district, and Dan Burke lost.
After decades, it's Ed Burke's brother, I believe.
Yeah, he is.
And
Same
one
thing
of
is
the
going to happen with Mike.
most powerful alderman in the city council.
Yeah.
Mike, never pronounce his name right, Majewski, the alderman out there. He's going to be replaced by a Hispanic too. His ward is mainly Hispanic, so there you go.
I think we're ready to. Well, I think we're coming up on break time.
Okay.
You've been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians, and we thank you for it. We'll be right back.
Hello, friends. Are you looking for a place to have some printing done? Well, I have the right place for you to go, and that is the printing store in Oak Park, Illinois. Call or see Phil Berry at 621 Madison Street, or call 708-383-3638. Phil Berry will sit down with you and help you plan whatever you need printed. Now, his products are brochures, booklets, business cards, catalogs, envelopes, letterheads, flyers, invitations, newsletters, notepads, menus, mailers, manuals, labels, posters, postcards, price list, NCR forms, sale sheets, table tents, pocket folders, and presentation forms. And he also has 1 to 4 color offset printing, digital copying, high-speed copying, graphic designs, typesetting, laminating, foil stamping, die cutting, and imprinting. And his complete bindery service includes booklets, cutting, scoring, folding, numbering, padding, and drilling. So once again, for all your printing needs, call or see Phil Berry at the printing store at 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois, or call 708-383-3638. They are located at Madison Street and Clarence, just east of Oak Park Avenue. And that's at 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois, or give Phil Berry a call at 708-383-3638. For all your printing needs, the printing store was there to help you. They're 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois. And once again, you can call Phil Berry at 708-383-3638.
Now, back to our show. John?
Well, thank you, Rich. We're back. This is our second hour of our April edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. We're talking about income taxes. We don't want to talk about the weather because the weather is, I guess right now the weather may be even more depressing than the subject of income taxes. It'd be a close contest between the two right now.
It would be kind of nice to have April showers
Yeah,
instead of
April
April snow.
When
Yeah,
April
18
showers
supposedly-
might come your way.
Supposedly Green Bay got 18 inches of snow.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I think 20, yeah.
Yeah,
they were up
we're
there, yeah,
we're kind
yeah.
of lucky. I mean, the snow belt was a little bit north of us, but Wisconsin, some of these other farm belt
Mm-hmm.
states got bad.
The whole
snow.
country,
Yeah.
we are very
Global-
lucky
And we've
here.
had
Global
East
warming.
Coast, yeah, that's all gathered.
My sister told me this morning when I was talking to her that she had 8 inches of snow sitting on her railing in front of her kitchen door.
That's in Wisconsin, John?
Yeah, Elkhorn, Wisconsin, yeah.
Wow.
But I like the
Pretty close.
relatively
That's
the-
close.
fortunate.
and the global warming people when
That's
you say
right.
make a comment like that,
When
they
it's
say, well, this proves further. This is actual proof that it's global
Absolutely.
warming,
Yeah,
even though
when
that
it's
it's cold and
too
snowy.
cold, that's global warming.
Yeah,
When
right.
it's too hot, that's
Right.
global warming.
I'd say that's a great.
I haven't heard him
That's a
talk
great
about
That's what
argument.
I call the heads I win, tails you
Right,
lose
yeah,
approach.
exactly.
Yeah.
I haven't
exactly.
heard him say global warming. Now it's climate change.
Yeah.
That's a new term.
Oh yeah,
Right,
they
you're right.
do cover themselves with that. It's climate change. Yeah, I thought we had a chance to talk a little bit about the early history of the income tax, the Civil War, the 1890s, World War I. To just carry the story a little further on, during the Great Depression, the government was having a hard time balancing the budget. And contrary to popular belief, FDR was concerned about balancing the budget. He had grown up with the notion that everybody had the notion the budget had to be balanced. And for that reason, taxes started going up in the mid to late 30s. And the rates had increased to the point where that top rate I had talked about was up to 75% in the late 1930s. So Henry Ford would have been paying, to use my good friend Henry Ford again, he would have been paying 75%, assuming he was covering all the tax laws and everything, before the coming of World War II. Well, World War II naturally changes everything. We're in a global war. We're fighting a military empire in Europe called Nazi Germany, another militarist empire in the Pacific called the Japanese Empire, and all the chips are on the table. So tax rates went up. And as I mentioned, the threshold of paying taxes went down. The threshold of paying taxes had been $3,000, $1,500, $2,500. They had played games through the years with where you began, and that meant if many people didn't make $2,000 a year in those days, so they didn't pay federal income taxes. but they dropped the threshold for paying income taxes down to $500 in World War II, which meant that virtually everybody would be paying taxes. The number of people who had been filing tax returns in 1937, there were 7 million people in the country who paid federal income tax. We had a population of about 135, 140 million. 7 million people were paying taxes. By 1945, 50 million Americans were paying federal income taxes. And since there were 15 million GIs in the Army, they weren't paying income tax. That meant virtually everybody who was working was paying income taxes by the end of World War II. The top rate went up during the war to a peak of 94%. And that was with this base rate plus the what they called the surtax. And then they combined it all into just one schedule of rates. And the top rate in World War II was 94. So you were getting to keep, theoretically, 6% of your income if you were in that top rate. Henry Ford would have been paying 94% of his income in federal taxes. After the war, they modestly adjusted it. But, we were right after World War II ended. We're in the Cold War with the Soviet Union. We're in the Korean War. So they brought it down to 86%, and then Korea comes along, and they bounce it right back up again. They bounce it up to 92% in the early 50s. When Dwight Eisenhower becomes president in 1953, they dropped it by a grand total of 1%. They dropped it to 91%. And so 91% was the top rate all through the 50s and into the early 60s. So once again, if you were Henry Ford in 1955, you would have been paying 91% of your income in federal income taxes. The man who changed it all was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I'll go into that a little bit later. But now I know Tom McKenna would like to talk about some aspects of the...
Well, I worked for a tax preparation service for a few years, and I found some very interesting things. Most people, they may have heard of EIC. It's called the Earned Income Credit. They may have heard of it, but they don't know exactly what it is. And it's one of those things that something that started out in Washington, D.C., and on paper was really a pretty good idea. When it actually got out into practice, like most things that start out in Washington, D.C., it completely fell apart and became a great source of tax fraud. And what earned income credit is because years ago, and it was a very legitimate argument. Someone would say, especially like single mothers, I go out to work and I'm making, $15,000 a year. I can make more money staying home, getting child care credit or welfare or food stamps or whatever. So what they said in Washington, that's a good point. So here's what we're going to do for you. We are going to give you credit for the income that you earn. It's one of the few refundable credits. Usually you can only get back the amount of taxes you paid in. If you paid in $10,000, you can't get more than $10,000 back. But this is known as a refundable credit. So what they did was they said, and it's calculated, it's a sliding scale, and the tables are published, you can look them up, that if you, I think the maximum you can get back is like maybe $6,000, $7,000. So let's say you made $20,000, you have two dependents, you can get back a pretty good chunk of change to make up for the income that to substitute the income that you earned. You get credit for it. That's what the earned income credit is. So now in practice, what people found out is that all you have to do is say that you earn this amount of money. I washed windows. I washed cars. I braided hair. I babysat or whatever. Whether you did or you didn't, but if you had some type of document, and as a tax preparer, you have to perform what's known as due diligence. But what due due diligence is asking them, do you have documents to support this? And if they say yes, then that's it. You don't have to present them. You just have to say, I have it. So you walk into a tax preparation office and you say, I braided hair in 2017 and I made $23,000 and I have 2 dependents, and you can walk out of the office with a check for $5,000. It's billions and billions of dollars of tax fraud that's occurring every year, and I don't know, I'm sure that they know about it, but it's and also the dependents, you just have to have Social Security numbers for them, and if no one else claimed them, because if someone else claimed them, it'll pop right up in the, this is the computer age, so it'll pop right back up. So it's got to be in the billions, and like I say, the average person doesn't know about it, but the group of people that do know about it, they do it.
They talked about tightening up that earned income tax credit under this last tax reform bill. Now, I haven't seen anything to indicate whether they did that or not. It's the kind of thing where I think one group in Congress would scream bloody murder before they would permit that to go through. But I know that there was some talk of trying to tighten up on the earned income tax.
And again, it's a great. I mean, I'm all for it if it's legit. Yeah. But again, the average person that's using it, and as soon as they find out about it, they say, well, hey, you don't work all year, you do nothing, you maybe collect some other benefits, and you walk into a tax office, you get 2 Social Security numbers, from wherever, as long as nobody else is claiming them, and you walk out with a nice check. That's a nice little payday. Sure. The other thing, you hear these commercials on the television about, do you owe money to the IRS? The television and especially radio is loaded with these ads.
Right.
Here's what that is, and they say you must owe more than $10,000, and the reason for that is I'll explain it to you. What it is, it's called an offer in kind, and I like to boil things down to very simple analogies. Let's say somebody borrowed $20 from you. You haven't seen him in a while. They happen to walk into the bar, and they walk up to you and they say, Tom, let me tell you something. I know I've owed you 20 for the last 6 months. I'm moving to California tomorrow. I'm not going to be coming back to Chicago. No, I know I owe you 20, but can I give you 10, and we'll call it even? What would you say? Yeah, well, of course. At least I'll get $10. I'm not going to see the guy again. Okay, flash forward to the IRS. Let's say for whatever reason, you sell some business or you owe a real lot of money, but you're just an average Joe. You owe $65,000. So there's only a couple people can speak directly to the IRS. One is called an enrolled agent, and any attorney. I don't know why any attorney, because there's so many different areas of law that a tax attorney wouldn't know anything about criminal law and vice versa. But anyway, that's if any attorney, if you're licensed to practice, you can deal with the IRS. So what they do is they call up and they say, hey, this guy, he's got a $30,000 a year job. He owes you $65,000. They say, okay, well, what can he pay us? Well, he can probably pay you, $2,000. That's all. Now, here's what the IRS guy goes. He goes, okay, $2,000. We wouldn't get it anyway. So right. Now you're off the books, and that's what that is.
But there's a catch to that. The difference between what he didn't pay, the IRS considers that taxable income because he didn't have to pay it, and that's taxable.
Yeah. Okay.
Like if you had 10,000 and you only had to pay 5,000, the other 5,000, according to the IRS, you didn't have to pay it, so that's income. So you have to. It becomes taxable.
Right. No, I understand, but in this particular situation, the offer in kind is they wipe the slate clean. That's what it is. Because, and again, like I said, It's just like I said, do you want to take this guy's $10? Or are you going to say, no, you owe me 20, I'm not taking this? Well, then you get nothing. And that's what it is. And again, some of them are elderly people that maybe they sold a home or a rental property. They didn't know they had to pay tax, so they owe a whole bunch of money. I heard the one guy, the enrolled agent in the office that I worked in, I used to hear him. He used to deal with these things that was like his specialty. And I used to hear him on the phone, hey, this guy's 84 years old. He owes you $75,000. What are you, nuts? He's going to give you $2,000. Take it. What are you, crazy? I mean, that's how the negotiations went. And that's what that is.
And there's, according to the ads, there's a threshold of $10,000. You have to owe the government $10,000 or more.
Yeah, because if it's under that, they won't do it, or it isn't worth their while.
Right.
So you get their tax burden down from 65,000 to 5,000, and then you get 2,000 or whatever. Another thing that people, they're in fear of the IRS. The IRS agents, and again, like I said, and the one guy that used to do audits, you go down, let's say you have to appear in the office, and those things are fewer and far between. Most of it is just done by correspondence. But anyway, you go down there and they say, okay, you've got this particular deduction. Do you have the evidence to support that? No, or they give you something to say, okay, all right, this deduction here, do you have the evidence to support that? No, all right. Okay, sir, you owe us $6,287. How would you like to pay that? They're not going to beat you up. They're not going to arrest you.
No.
They're not going to say, this is what you owe us. How would you like to take care of that?
When our
Don't
friend
they
Ralph...
have a payment plan now too that they take it right out of your check?
They'll say this is what you owe us, and then if you don't pay it, then they garnish your. The FBI, the IRS has some very, very powerful tools. I mean, they can put liens on your property. They can freeze your bank accounts. They can
When our friend Ralph Cramden, I told this story about Ralph Cramden, he, after fretting and worrying that he was going to go to jail and imagining all the horrors that were going to happen to him, when he finally goes down for his appointment with the IRS man is as friendly as can be, and the only problem with his return is that he forgot to sign on the proper line.
Before e-filing, that was the most common.
Forgetting to file your return, forgetting to sign your return. Yeah. So, I'd like to say, before we break for this, we got a little time to go on this segment, but we mentioned our good friend, that eminent statesman Bernie Sanders, who calls himself a socialist, but says he's a democratic socialist. And he, of course, one of the great exponents of soaking the rich. And I always like to say a word on behalf of the rich, because this concept is out there all the time, that the rich are not paying their fair share. You hear that from people on the left all the time. The rich are not paying their fair share. Well, first of all, who determines what their fair share is? Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Nancy Pelosi, who is rich herself, and so is Bernie Sanders, as a matter of fact. But anyway, I can't quote you the exact statistics, but these are in the ballpark range. The top 1%, who are the much maligned 1%, pay about 25% of all federal income taxes. Now you might say, well, they get 25% of the income. No, they earn about 15% of all income, and they pay about 25% of taxes. The top 10%, again, these are ballpark figures, but from I've seen them over a period of years, and they're roughly accurate. The top 10% pay about 50% of all the federal income taxes in the country. And the top 50% of earners are paying 100% of all the income taxes, or close to it, maybe 98%. So my argument is the rich are already paying plenty of taxes. They're already paying their fair share. And when you have people who maybe are paying no income taxes saying that somebody else is not paying his fair share, I don't have a great deal of interest in that argument. If you're paying nothing and you're complaining that somebody else isn't paying enough, I want to move on and hear what somebody else has to say about this subject.
Well, there was a some town hall meeting, and I forget the politician, but one of the people at the meeting stood up and asked him, and he didn't, it was asked just like a regular legitimate question. He said, how much of my money do you think I should be able to keep? I mean, what percentage? You know, that is a legitimate question, and the guy had no answer for it. But the thing is, the leading candidate for Democratic candidate for governor, JB, the Democrats just can't help themselves. He is already talking about increasing the tax, and he's talking about a graduated income tax, and again, to tax the rich.
Soak the rich.
Yeah.
I think
People are still sore about the last tax increase.
I think one of the big things with the average guy out there complains about the rich is that they get all of these deductions. Friend of mine, guy I know very well, and he's passed away now. He's a very rich guy. Sure, he had a big car, and he had a jet, and he had seats at the ballparks and all of that, and it was all tax deductible. And I think that's what the average guy is upset about. Why would he do that if it wasn't tax deductible? No.
That's one of the problems with the taxes over the years, was that as they made these rates so high, but then they added in all of these loopholes.
You're right.
Deductions, exemptions, credits, and a lot of them were added in because congressmen and senators wanted to do something for the folks back home, for a business or an industry that was important to their district or to their state, or somebody that was a big contributor. So that's why the tax code is so complicated, because it's filled with all these little provisions. And what it does was it encourages people to invest their money, not where it's going to be most productive, but where it's going to save on their income taxes.
Right.
That's why I used to talk about the oil depletion allowance in the oil patch in Texas and Oklahoma. It was a way of sheltering your income, investing in things that really weren't going to grow the economy and weren't necessarily going to create jobs, but it would save you from paying income taxes.
And them.
Yeah.
And some of these guys, and I know him too, they don't pay any income tax by the time they get all these deductions and all of these sideline things.
If I had money and it was legal, why not do it?
Well, I like
And it is legal, of course.
I like some of the politicians that are talking about simplifying the tax code, and they said, a person should be able to file their tax return on one page. Well, it's 2 pages now. So I mean, what are you saving? I mean, with all the attachments. I mean, if you have a business and if you itemize, there are other attachments. But you can file. There's a 1040 Easy, I think it's called.
Right.
Easy. And you can file it on 1 page now.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you wanted, they said everybody pays 10%, they would be actually paying more than if they could get the deductions.
I don't know about 10%. I don't know.
Well,
but your point is, if they simplify the tax code and go to what they call a flat rate or
right, everybody pays a flat rate.
You'd get rid of most of all the exemptions, deductions, credits, all this stuff that's been encrusted onto.
But you'll end up paying more.
You might or you might not. You might not. But one of the things would be the simplicity of it.
Right.
You wouldn't have to pay someone to do your income tax. It would save a lot of work and a lot of fretting and record keeping and everything. If you just I made $85,000 this year, you pay 12% or whatever it is, and that's it. You're all over. It's all finished.
Right. You introduce any tax bill that would simplify the tax code and preparations, and there is a traffic jam of lobbyists heading towards the Capitol with satchels of money.
Right, money in hand.
Yeah, they always talk about a postcard. They talk about Jack Kemp used to talk about where you could file your income taxes on a postcard.
Mine, I really simplify it. When they start sending you these things for tax stuff enclosed, I got a folder, stick it in there, stick it in there, stick it in there. When I think I got everything, I stick it under my CPA's door, He calls me up. You owe me so much. That's it.
Well, that's the thing with tax preparation. Once you have someone's, like last year's return, because when I did them, if you had the return from last year,
It's like
it's
autopilot.
yeah,
Pretty
it's,
much
it's
the same,
It's
right.
it's pretty similar.
Just plug in the numbers. You saw what he had in the way of deductions.
Right. But the way with the computers
Oh,
and all your employees and
yeah.
anybody that you made money off of is sending to the IRS, maybe with the
Oh,
exception
with- right.
of taxable.
Without the computers
They might end up to a point where they'll either send you a bill or a refund. You won't even have to file the tax.
Yeah, years ago, before they came out with these computer programs for tax preparation, I mean, you change one line, and you had to change everything. It was a nightmare. Now you hit one button, you change it, and everything automatically changes.
Yeah, with these computer programs, the guy I does, that's all he does is, you want to change something? Okay, he hits a button, it's done.
Yeah.
And most people now file electronically.
Right.
Well, if you have a tax preparer, they have to file
you don't
electronically.
have to mail in your form
Right.
the way it was previously.
And you get
And the
it-
scammers come up with all of these ideas too about this IRS calling you on the phone and boy, they sure know. Too bad those guys aren't legit. You know?
Well, yeah,
Too
because
bad they
I've
aren't.
heard if the IRS wants, they'll send you a letter. They don't call you on the phone.
Yeah.
No, they
Right.
don't
Yeah,
call you.
almost everything is done by mail.
By mail,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
I had a
Feel
gentleman
sorry
that
for some of these old people.
I had a gentleman
that
that
get whacked by that.
Oh, wait,
I had a gentleman that called me on the phone and told me he was his name and that he was, well, he left a voice message that he's from the IRS and he's giving me a whole spiel that I owe so much money and all that. So I took and wrote the number down. I got in my truck, took a ride over to 4020 Alcott, which is the Norwich Police Department, got a hold of the detective over there, and I gave him all the information and then nailed the guy.
Good.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
I did the same thing. He called me, and I have, a thing that shows the phone number. So I called the IRS. I said, this guy's representing himself as you. He says, well, unless you got a phone number. I said, uh-huh. And he said, we'll take care of him.
They have. I've got the number somewhere in my phone of the IRS, whatever they call it.
Field office.
Yeah, it's their unit that takes care of that stuff.
Right.
And I got hacked here a while back and tried to get a hold of them and that, and
I don't
I
even-
got from all of the police sources and that saying, you know what, Bill, they don't care.
Right.
They're so
Well, this
so
is,
busy with other
I
stuff.
didn't
Well,
even-
these scammers, they assume people are going to panic when they just hear the
Right.
letters
Yeah.
IRS, and they're going to do whatever. They're not going to question it. They're not
Mhm.
going to think about it, and that's
No.
what they're depending on. That people
I
aren't
had
going
a politician have a phone, call me on the phone, and it was, I saw the number, and it said IRS, and then this guy's name, and then something else.
Yeah, they apparently have a way to make it appear when it comes up on your.
So you call him back.
Yeah, it looks like it gives you something that appears to be IRS headquarters or something.
This
They
was
have-
a
they have way of
politician
faking
running
that.
for office.
Oh,
Yeah, now with again the computer age and all the sophisticated printing systems that they have, they say that the fake documents look more authentic than the real
Real.
real
They do.
documents.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
It might be one comma or semicolon is all the difference.
And all of these other outfits that are, win $1 million, win $7,000 a week for life, and,
Right.
and all of that. I get them constantly every day, I think, and they all look so legitimate
Oh, yeah.
and so well done.
mhm.
There's got to be some geniuses behind that.
That happened during World War II. I'm going to say it was with the Americans were going to flood Germany with counterfeit currency, And it failed because the American our counterfeit currency was so much better printed than the German currency that was in circulation that people could tell the difference because it looked so much better than the currency that they were using.
We had a thing in downtown Oak Park. The kids, there was, I don't know what it was, a magazine, and it said something about forgery, money. And the kids were cutting it out and sticking it in pop machines.
Oh.
And the pop machine was taking it.
Oh, God. Well, we'll be right back. And now here's our announcer, Rich Lang.
Now for another brief intermission. You've been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians.
Hi, friends. Do you need a carpet for your living room, dining room, bedroom, den, family room, or even your outdoor patio? Well, the place to go for a great deal is the Carpet Warehouse, which is located at 4300 West Montrose Avenue in Chicago, or give them a call at area code 773-283-0100. So remember, friends, for a great deal on any carpeting you may need for your living room, dining room, bedroom, den, family room, or even that outdoor patio, go or call the Carpet Warehouse at 4300 West Montrose Avenue in Chicago, or call 773-283-0100. Now, they are on Montrose Avenue. They are east of Cicero Avenue or the Kennedy Expressway exit on Montrose Avenue. So the Carpet Warehouse, for great deals on any carpeting you may need, 4300 West Montrose Avenue, or call 773-283-0100. Remember, for a great deal on any carpeting for your home, go to the Carpet Warehouse, 4300 Montrose Avenue, and once again, their phone number is area code 773-283-0100 for a great deal.
Now back to our special income tax edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. John?
Well, thank you very much, Rich. So we've been having a pretty interesting discussion today about the Internal Revenue Service and income tax. And what I like to do is kind of wind up my little tour of the history of the income tax by bringing it up to more recent times. We talked about World War II and how the top rate was kind of locked in at 91% in the 50s and 60s. The standard deduction, I think is what they call it, or the standard exemption, what you get for yourself, they were very generous. It had been $500 during the war, and Congress in its wisdom boosted that all the way up to $600.
That sounds right.
And you may remember that for many years that was $600 that you were allowed to credit for yourself, your wife, your children. That was it. And that's where it stood until John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who recognized something that is very much in play today but was not thought of in those days. And that is that high tax rates actually retard the economy. If you tax income and you tax corporations and you tax people who are earning money, it's a disincentive for them to make more money because the government's just going to keep taking more and more of it away from them. And the thinking is what we now call supply-side economics, that if you lower the tax rates, you're actually going to encourage people to invest and create a bigger economy, put more money into stocks, bonds, companies, buildings. And so John Kennedy proposed that tax rates be reduced. He gave a great speech in which he made the statement that's you may have heard before. He said, "A rising tide lifts all boats." If you create prosperity in the country, everybody's going to benefit. Not just the rich, everybody's going to benefit from a rising tide of prosperity. So under Kennedy, he proposed, and I don't think it actually went into effect till after he was assassinated. He had proposed this legislation. It was in Congress. It wasn't finally enacted until, I believe, after his assassination. But that top rate that had been 91% was reduced, I believe, to 70%, which was a dramatic drop from 91%. And so this concept of lower tax rates bringing in more, and they actually will bring in more money, that if you grow the economy, Congress and the government will receive more money in taxes from lower rates. And it worked. It actually worked. Mm-hmm. And the Kennedy tax cut was in large part responsible for the boom of the 1960s. There was a great roar of prosperity in the 1960s, and at least a part of it is attributable to that tax cut. But then Congress, as it always does, they started tinkering and ratcheting with things. And it was left for Ronald Reagan in 1981 to sort of carry it to step two. And in his tax proposal, they brought that top rate of 70% down, I believe, to 33%. More than roughly half. They tinkered around. He wanted 35, and they finally compromised, I think, on 33 or 34%. He had wanted to bring it down to 30, and they agreed. But in any event, it was a major reduction. And that set off the boom of the 1980s, that huge Reagan tax cut.
Right.
And I remember one of Reagan's lines was, remember when Reagan became president, we were mired in a recession.
True.
And he immediately was responsible, in the eyes of the media, was the minute he lowered his hand from taking the oath of office, it was his economy. The fact that he had inherited from Carter, they didn't talk about that. And they were always talking about Reaganomics. Remember, Reaganomics meant everybody was suffering. And I remember Reagan says, well, you know, I knew our economy was on the upswing when they stopped calling it Reaganomics.
What is it now?
I don't know.
The top rate.
I think 35, isn't it?
It's in that 30 to 35% range. It's never been raised. I think that under Obama's tax increase, they may have brought it up to 38 or 39. It's higher than it had been in the Reagan years.
Okay.
But they've never dared try to take it back to 70 or 90% where it had been in the bad old days. But and of course, since that time, you had tax cuts under George W. Bush. You had a tax increase under Obama, and now we've had another tax cut in the Trump administration. But fortunately, I think, at least for the short term, no one has ever had the fortitude to say we want to go back to a 91% top rate. Bernie Sanders might buy that, but I doubt that anybody else would.
Well, I remember one of Obama's campaign speeches. He was saying that in this greatest country on the face of the earth, it's a disgrace that Warren Buffett, a billionaire, his secretary pays more taxes than he does, which is absolute, complete absurd. Anyone that knows that, but people quoted that, and he knew it was a lie. What he meant to say, well, maybe he didn't mean to say it because I don't really put a lot of faith in his economic policies. But anyway, what he meant to say is that Warren Buffett, or most billionaires, they make their money off capital gains. They're not they're not working part-time at McDonald's. So the capital gains tax is lower than the income tax. Obama wanted to raise the capital gains tax. And again, like I said earlier, I like to reduce things down to something very simple that most people can understand. Let's say you owned a nightclub. You were charging $20 cover at the door. No one was coming in. Now, would you think you would get more business by raising the cover charge or by lowering it? Well, of course, common sense. You lower it. That's it in a nutshell, what John was just talking about lowering something but getting more money. Every single economist said that lowering capital gains will generate more money. There was and I'm surprised they actually asked Obama the question. You know, most economists, and I would have to say all economists, say, lowering the capital gains would generate more income for the government. And you know how Obama responded? Well, that's true, but it wouldn't be fair. it wouldn't be fair. So he was looking for fairness, which, I mean, are you kidding me?
One of the problems we face in this country is that our school system teaches kids virtually nothing about economics. And what they do learn is wrong. They learn all this soak the rich class warfare stuff that the rich are shafting everybody, and if we just wiped out the rich, everybody would live happily ever after. They don't understand how the economy works, how the government works. I'm sure they think that when the government is short of money, they just can print more of it, and that's no problem there. If people had an understanding of economics, the way they get an understanding of economics is when they have to go out into the real world and get a job. And then the reality hits them in the face, as you mentioned, when they think they're being told what their salary is going to be, and then when they get their first paycheck and see all those deductions that have been taken out, that's when they begin to understand how the economy actually works.
That's what Tom was saying, yeah.
That's why the Bernie Sanders movement is a youth-oriented movement.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, I would like free everything. You know,
Sure.
I would like the federal government to pay my car insurance. You know,
Yeah,
but the bottom line is reality slaps you in the face. You know, it's things like this are impossible. You know, look the whole boondoggle with Obamacare. You know, there were all kinds of things wrong with the healthcare system. What Obamacare did is not fix any of the things that were wrong, but create more problems.
Mixed them up.
And again, the outright lie about if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. The average premium will go down by $2,500. Now, he knew that wasn't true, but he had to say that to sell it.
Yeah, and everything the government says is expensive, and I think that's for a reason, because all these kids now, they're talking about socialism because it'd be a lot cheaper because they can't afford Medicare or Medicaid or Obamacare or whatever it is, because it's so darn expensive. And,
right.
And even the government charges a lot because they're the only ones you can get a government loan for education now.
Expanding on what John just said about what we teach kids in school today, you hear these commencement speakers, colleges and universities, and even valedictorians in high school, and they talk about you are special, you are the hope and the future of the country. You are going to go out and go forth and create a system in this country that will be idolized by the rest of the world, and on and on and on.
And 6 months later, he's flipping hamburgers at McDonald's.
Exactly. And they found out just what you said, Don, that that was all BS, and now they realize that they are not going to be able to achieve what they were told that they could achieve, and so now they're looking around, and hey, let's look into that socialism thing. I don't think I'm going to have to work. Everybody gets the same amount of money. It's all, that might be a way to go, and that's the reason for that.
One of the guys in the members, I think he was the vice president of the Teamsters, one of the Teamsters was telling me one day when we were having a meeting when I was in office, he said, Bill, he says, we're talking about our kids, our grandkids and our kids. He says, you never realize how many are looking for jobs with us that have college educations that they were all hepped up about, going out in the world, living downtown, He says, and what are they doing? They're driving a truck.
Yeah, they say that this generation is the first generation in this country that isn't going to be significantly better off than their parents.
Right.
You
were hearing that the unemployment rate is very low, but look at the quality of jobs that are out there.
Yeah.
That's the big point. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell
And
you
the people that would take those jobs are the ones that are living on welfare.
Yeah.
Well, you look at the economy today. We've cut taxes. president's cut regulations, and the economy is soaring. Unemployment, by the end of this year, unemployment could be a word you have to look up in a dictionary because no one's going to remember what it was. We're at what they call full employment.
Black unemployment is that there's no record keeping that even could go back to when it's been this low.
And yet you have the other side that says if we get into power, we're going to put all those regulations back again, and we're going to raise tax, and the economy will tank again.
Sure. Well,
And they'll blame it on the rich.
right.
They'll blame it on the 1%.
Getting it back to education, how many, I call them kids, but young people, they get degrees in something that has absolutely nothing to do with getting a job.
In employment.
Employment, right.
Yeah, it's like I like to say, you graduate from college, you are $100,000 in debt, and you have a degree in jazz flute
Right.
Or
with,
literature.
with a minor in medieval literature.
Yeah.
They don't teach these kids probably from grade school on up about history
No.
or economics or whatever you want to say, civics.
I think because if they
It's all
taught them
out.
history, people would recognize that this has gone on before and it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Well, our educational system is riddled with failure, and the fact that they don't teach economics is one of the problems. It's one they say people today are economic illiterates. They have no understanding of how the economy works, and that enables a demagogue, to get up there and say, we just took if everything was just fair, we just make everything fair.
Right, exactly.
I remember here, and it's been a while back, that one of my grandkids was, I was out with him, and he said something about, I said, oh, how was school today? Oh, it's fine. I said, what'd you do? He says, oh, I learned how to make out a check and cash a check.
Make out.
That's probably more than most kids learn
Because
about.
handwriting has
fine.
almost vanished from.
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
of course, now checks are becoming a thing of the past.
That's
You're right.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
debit cards
Debit
and
cards,
automatic
yeah.
withdrawals and ATMs and
And where I used to work, they hired, I don't think they call her a secretary. I don't know if that's demeaning now or not. But she had a college
Administrative
degree and
assistant.
didn't know how to write a check.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You're the executive
Okay.
producer. You can do whatever
All
you can do whatever you want.
Since we've been on the air taping here this afternoon, I keep hearing you talk about the rich. The rich should do this and the rich should do that. What determines the rich? I mean, what do you gentlemen here sitting in the studio here? What is your thinking, or how do you classify a person that's rich?
I'm going to give you a quick answer to that. I've thought about it. I think most people think that the rich consist of anybody who has more money than they do.
That's a good point.
No one
Right,
can.
right.
Very few people think of themselves as being rich.
Okay, then let me put it this way.
Rich
then.
is somebody that's got more than you do.
Then you're rich and I'm poor because you probably got more money.
I don't.
Bigger house, bigger
There's a
car.
joke.
Yeah.
They were talking. Somebody said to John F. Kennedy once. They said, is it true, Mr. President, that your father, your family is worth $400 million? And he said, well, he says that may be true, but let me tell you about the Rockefeller brothers. You know the Rockefeller brothers are worth $2.5 billion. Now that's being rich. That's money.
Yeah, I'm
It's all your frame of reference.
I'm
Yeah.
idealistic, but I don't equate richness with money. I mean, it's like class.
That's a good point.
You can't buy class. Either you have it or you
Oh
don't.
yeah.
Is it sort of like you can't buy happiness? If
Right.
you're really happy, you might
Money
be
isn't
considered rich, yeah.
isn't evil. It's the love of money that's
What's the point?
right.
I think this is a thought that I've had. I think that people who would be in what we generally call the middle class, who hear a politician railing against the rich, I think they would be surprised to learn what the supporters of that politician, what they consider to be rich. they consider the middle class to be rich. They're not thinking of the Rockefellers and the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts. They think that people at this table, the people who are middle class, that's the rich in the eyes of a lot of these. We talk about kids.
Right.
I think that again, it's this failing that people don't have a common understanding of what the term rich means. And many people who think that they're middle class would find out that people who are lower down the ladder on them consider them to be rich. And they're the ones that need to be shafted in terms of paying more in income tax. It's not just the Warren Buffetts and the Henry Fords that they think should be paying more money.
If you think about it, in this country, the lowest class, poorest people are so much better off than 99% of the rest of the world.
Well, that's a point true.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
My mother always used to say, if money bought happiness, then rich people would be the happiest people on the face of the earth. And as you said,
And that's not always the case.
Yeah, it's the direct opposite.
Yeah.
The problems that some of these people have.
Yeah. The suicides, the alcoholism.
Right,
Look at these guys.
drug addiction.
Yeah.
Look at these guys that win all of this money in lotteries and that, and then you find out later on that they're, like you say, they're alcoholics. They're got
It's
all
gone in less
kinds of
than a year.
problems and no, money doesn't buy that type of happiness.
And the one thing that's always been great about this country is that everybody has an opportunity to get
Right.
rich. And it was always true of Americans that they always felt that their children would, as you mentioned earlier, would do better than they did. And it was true that each generation did do better. And you could be nobody. I mean, you could be a Henry Ford. I mean, Henry Ford came from an ordinary family. His father was a farmer, I believe.
Farmer in Ireland.
He becomes the richest man on earth. And there are a lot of examples of
Right.
people like that.
Sure.
Of people who start with nothing and make incredible. Andrew Carnegie, all these
Right.
people we read about in the 1880s and 90s. Very few of them had any inherited money.
I think the best thing this government could give to people is an opportunity. What they do with it is not the government's fault, or
Right.
they can't take credit for it.
The country has always been called a land of opportunity,
Exactly.
but
Right.
you have to do something with that
That's right.
opportunity.
You can't sit back and
Yeah.
expect the opportunity to come to you. You
But
have
that
to
seems
work,
to be the thing, that rich people have a lot of money. We deserve part of it.
Yeah.
It's income redistribution.
That's why generations of immigrants came to this country from Europe, because they knew that they would have a chance here to
Right.
do something that where the opportunity didn't exist anywhere else. And it is in large measure still true that it
And
is that way.
99%
If government would get out of the way.
of all the people in this country are immigrants. I mean, the only ones are Native American Indians.
And
probably.
they came here from Asia. I always say when the Indians came here from Asia too. There's no native
Right,
population.
they all came here.
Of
I
the
mean,
Everybody came here from somebody
we
else.
can
somewhere
we
else.
can trace our history back a little over 200 years. Other countries, thousands of years.
Thousands of years. Yeah.
Asia.
But even the American Indians, they crossed over through the Bering Straits and came down hundreds and thousands of years ago, I would imagine.
Okay, I wasn't
Everybody,
aware of that.
yeah, they were not native. There was no native population in the Americas. Everybody came here from
Well,
somewhere
that's
else.
what I always said when they talk about Christopher Columbus discovering America. How do you discover someplace that's already inhabited?
Good point.
That's a nice trick.
You know what the
I'm
Native
discovering you.
Americans
Hey,
saw
wait a
when they
minute,
said
we're
Christopher
living here.
Columbus coming ashore? He said, "Oh, great boat people."
Well, it's not Columbus Day anymore. You have to be politically correct. It's Indigenous People Day.
Yeah, nonsense.
The Italians are not very happy about that.
Right now, I'm thinking rather pessimistically. You could argue to some degree that the story of American history is the increasing growth and power of the federal government.
Oh yes.
If that continues, maybe far beyond our lifetime, when people like Bernie Sanders will do their thing, when he, let's say, has given everybody a free college education, which is a big part of his thing,
Right.
and free health care, what will income tax be like in those days? How do you pay for all this?
Well, just think
And that
about
you could argue might be the trend in decades to come.
Well, you wind up you wind up where Greece is today. I mean,
Good
if
example.
you get that kind of left policy in power, they raise taxes, they increase the burden of regulations, because that's what gets them the votes from their base. We're going to soak the rich, we're going to punish the corporations. The economy goes down because the more you tax and the more you regulate, the less economic growth you're going to get, and that increases unemployment. That means the government takes in even less in taxes. So what's their solution? Raise taxes even higher. And you just spiral downward. And this has happened in Europe. It's happened in Greece, where you reach a point, you are so deeply in debt that you can never pay it off. Your debt is so much bigger than the nation's economy, you can never pay it
Well,
off.
we're getting to that point, I think.
Our national debt today is $20 trillion. It doubled under
Can't
Obama.
even imagine this.
It doubled under George W. Bush, to be fair about it.
That's
It was
true.
like $5 trillion when Bush became president. It doubled to 10 under Bush. It doubled to 20 under Obama. Now, it hasn't been going up at that rate now, but Congress, what do? They spend money. If you're a congressman or a senator, what do you go to Washington to do? For all too many of them, they go there to spend money. That's how you get reelected.
Well,
By building a bridge or a dam or a highway or something of that sort.
would they call it bankruptcy if the debt matched the gross domestic product?
There are countries
supposed
in
to be a
Europe where
threshold,
there are
right,
countries in Europe where the debt is way beyond the gross national.
Well, how do they exist then?
They don't. The answer is they don't. They have to get money from the European Union, the Germans, and the countries that are solvent. Those countries that are run on a more solvent basis wind up being cadged into paying money.
Right.
That's why the German voters were getting angry at all the money that Germany was spending to fund all these profligate countries. And it's just the same thing here. You wind up taxing the productive half of society to support that portion of society that isn't productive.
But when
You
the
can't-
productive half
eventually it all
goes away,
crashes.
what happens?
It all crashes.
Right.
It just all
Well,
crashes.
they talk about the healthcare system in some of the Scandinavian countries, but their taxes are about 65%, I
Yeah.
believe.
Oh, yeah.
And those people are
But-
accustomed. They're accustomed to paying those taxes.
Right.
But see, we had a notion in this country of individual liberty,
Right.
of self-reliance. We didn't have this notion that government is the be-all of everything.
I was
Government
talking
takes care
I was
of us.
talking to my sister. I said, Margaret, when we were growing up, did you ever think? I mean, did it ever cross your mind at any point, in your life, that if you didn't make money, you could look to the federal government as an answer
Right.
for support? And the answer is no.
No.
But
We knew when we were growing up, you got to get out there and work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the
Well,
only.
Look to
That's
the
the only
private
way.
charities or something
Our
like
parents,
that. Yeah,
our
yeah.
the Depression generation, they, most of them would have done anything rather than go on any form of welfare.
Yeah.
Sure, it
Even
was-
as bad as things were in the 1930s,
sense of
they were
pride.
they were looking for
Right.
work. They were
Yeah.
even like the CCC. I mean, that was still they were working
Doing
and
something,
earning
right.
money. It wasn't just a paycheck being
Right.
given to you.
But in my town, I monitor the police, and there's people calling the police because their kids won't go to school.
Mm.
Yeah.
You should be a truant officer.
911. Yeah, they think that's emergency for anything.
Right. And
new-
I mean,
the
it's
new-
all
the new
this
parent.
simple, goofy stuff.
Yeah.
My
yeah.
husband's yelling at me,
What was the one?
and they have to go.
They called up because the pizza company wouldn't deliver pizza to them, and they called 911 because they wanted a. There was a story like that.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't get delivery and they wanted a
those
pizza. So they
the
called
stories
nine-
are legendary. The woman that called because the McDonald's ran out of chicken McNuggets.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard that one.
But it's the mentality. It's not just the stupidity of it's the mentality that there's this magic number you call and they're going to solve all your problems for you. They're going to take care of you.
But they should give whoever's taking these calls the opportunity to say, "Lady, get out of here. We're not going
You
to
do that, you get fired. You know,
Yeah.
they'll have you on. They'll have you on
And
60
now
Minutes
if
or.
they call,
you know.
they've got to. How stupid it is! They have to go.
Even for the most stupid of calls, you're obligated to go. Otherwise, you might get into trouble from somebody.
Right, somebody
That's
else-
You
incredible.
somebody
got to
else-
hear
so-
the stories that some of our paramedics come up with. They're the
Yeah, we're
first
coming
ones
up
out
on-
on
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And if you dial 911 and hang up, they'll send a squad car over to find out why.
Oh, yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Okay, folks, now here's our announcer, Rich Lang.
You've been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians. Time for another brief intermission, and we'll be right back.
Well, friends, it's that time of the year again when you want to check your roof, siding, and gutters and make sure they're in great shape in case we have any bad weather. You may want to check the roof, siding, and gutters on your home and make sure that they are in good shape. You don't want mold or mildew in your attic or crawl space, or drip, drip, drip on the ceilings in your rooms, or have your walls damaged by leaky gutter or bad siding. So don't have double expense. Sooner or later, you're going to have to get it repaired. So why not call Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters at area code 630-616-1359. Mike Besh will drive over in his shiny red truck with ladders on top, and Mike will look over your roof, siding, and gutters and give you an estimate and go from there. So once again, don't have double expense. Call Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters for a free estimate at area code 630-616-1359. That's Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters at area code 630-616-1359. Call today for a free estimate. That's Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters, 630-616-1359 for a free estimate. 630-616-1359. Besh Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters.
Now back to our discussion. John?
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is our final half hour of our April edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. We're in this undisclosed, underground, highly reinforced bunker, the John DeVita Broadcast Center. This was once used, I think, by Vice President Dick Cheney when he was in a heavily reinforced bunker underground, and we're glad to be here. We have our regular band of panelists, and we're sorry that our good friend Jack Ryan is not here today. Tom McKenna always likes to point out that he's not only a lifelong friend of Jack Ryan, he's one of the very, very few who are willing to admit to that.
That's right.
So, Jack, if you're listening to this edition, we hope your I think your grandchild had some difficulties. We hope you're back with us. We hope all of you had a very blessed Easter. We're in the month. The month began April the 1st with Easter and the resurrection of Christ, and if you're the Jewish faith, Passover was at that same time. So it's a very holy season of the year, so at least we've had that going for us this month, even if the weather hasn't been very productive. We've been talking about income tax and the role of income tax in our society. One more little story I'd like to tell you in our final half hours. We talk about the Internal Revenue Service. And internal revenue and income tax are not one and the same. We had internal revenue in the country even when there wasn't an income tax. And it kind of went into this idea that the tariff on imports, that's external revenue. That's taxes on goods coming into the internal revenue were taxes on anything that happened within the confines of the United States. And there was a time when they had excise taxes. During the Civil War, they funded much of the war effort was funded with what were called excise taxes. Now today you think of an excise tax, we have taxes on alcohol and tobacco. Those are the two things that are most heavily taxed, where they just tax the product. But in those days, it was said during the Civil War, they taxed everything. And the example I read about was if you had a buggy, that was in the days of horse-drawn carriages, they would tax the leather and the metal and the wood that went into making the buggy. That was a tax. The guy that mined the metal, the guy that sawed the lumber, the guy who tanned the leather, he was taxed. The manufacturer who put all that together, he was taxed. So was taxed the second time. The dealer, who then got the buggy from the manufacturer, when he sold it, then he was taxed. And the purchaser, the fellow at the end of the chain who bought the buggy, he was taxed at the point of buying it from the dealer.
Right.
So they had this series of taxes on everything. And of course, this is another thing about taxes that I thought I wanted to mention is the fellow who bought it wound up paying all the taxes. He pays them all. The guy that mined the metal and sawed the lumber, he got his money back when he sold it to the manufacturer. He included that in the cost. The manufacturer who was taxed, he got his money back when he sold it to the dealer. And then the dealer got his money back when he sold it to the purchaser. The guy who winds up paying all the tax is the consumer.
That's right.
So when people saying they're taxing corporations, you don't really tax corporations.
Tax people.
If you tax General Motors, if General Motors sells 1 million cars, and you tax General Motors $1 billion, if you levy $1 billion of taxes on General Motors, they just increase the price of each one of those cars by $1,000.
Right.
They get that money back. Who pays that tax? The guy that buys the Chevrolet. He's the one that's paying that corporate income tax. There is no Mr. General Motors who has to sit down and write a check to the federal government and
Right.
mail it in. You pay it. So this whole notion of taxing corporations, you don't tax. They always say corporations don't pay taxes, they just collect taxes.
That's right.
They just
pass
collect
them
it
on.
from, they pass them on to the consumer.
Question. I know some states have personal property taxes. The federal government ever considered that?
No, again, that would not have been covered by the amendment because I think the amendment covered taxes on incomes only, not personal
Only
property.
income is mentioned.
Yeah, it's only an income
Because I know
tax.
some states have it.
Wisconsin has
Yeah,
personal
states do
property
that,
tax.
counties. I mean,
Right.
that's up to the locality. And by the way, even before we had a federal income tax, there were states that were beginning to levy state income tax. We think of that as a recent development. But states were free to do it even before the federal government was able to levy income taxes.
We had a tax guy up in when I had a place in Mazomanie, Wisconsin, and we had Howard was milking about 100 head, and every time that tax guy would come around, we would take a lot of those and put them in the farm next to us,
Wow.
just so he couldn't count them.
Right.
They would tax if the cat had kittens, bingo, you get taxed on those. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Speaking about ridiculous, I don't know if it is or not, but if you say, I lived in Illinois and did a lot of work in, say, another state and made money, do I have to pay that tax to Illinois?
No,
or
they
to
have
Wisconsin?
ways of, and I'm not a
Reciprocity?
tax ed, but if you have to pay taxes in Wisconsin or Indiana, I think there is a way in which you then are able to credit that, so that you don't have to pay the
Prorate it
same
in some
tax
way.
the second
Illinois.
time.
Okay.
That income is not. That's double taxation. You're
Okay.
supposed to be able to have a way of avoiding
Okay, I
that.
was just curious.
One of my favorite jokes about taxes is that the only reason we don't have to pay tax on the air we breathe is because government has never figured out a way to meter it.
Yet.
When they do.
Because I had a truck, and I would go interstate. And if I went into another state, the state cops would or the Secretary of State or whatever they would stop you, and how much gas you got in your tank. And if you told him 3/4, and he would look, okay, you got so many gallons, you got to pay state sales tax on the fuel you bring into the state. If you had a 1/4 of a tank, go on, because you're going to buy it in the state. But they have reciprocity rules, and then they got stickers saying that somehow you agree to do certain stuff. I never got into that. Same thing with license plates. I would go into Indiana, and for a couple of years, I had to buy and display both Illinois and Indiana license plates, or else they would give you a ticket for not having Indiana registration.
Many trucks would have multiple state licenses.
Before this last tax bill that was just adopted by Congress at the end of last year, the United States had the highest corporate income tax rates in the developed world, among European, Japan,
Right.
the major nations in the world. And for that reason, we had American corporations that were holding trillions of dollars overseas.
In
They weren't,
cash.
yeah, and it wasn't productive for they would like to bring that, but if they brought that money back into the United States, the government was going to glom on to an outrageous percentage of it. Now they're bringing that money back in, and it's going to hopefully the idea is it will fuel more
Right.
development here in the United States where that money should be used.
You know, you were talking about Ronald Reagan earlier. One of my favorite Ronald Reagan quotes: "If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it."
That's good. I never heard that one. That's great.
There's another joke about a congressman in Washington. He's got an astronomer there telling him about the latest NASA program to discover if there might be life on other worlds. And the congressman says, "The only reason I'm interested in life on other worlds is there some way that we can tax it."
Right.
And you hear more and more talk about more at the local level, I think, of a service tax. I think a state is considering this. You go to a dry cleaner, you should pay a tax, that sort of thing.
Right.
You know, that's one of the things that always killed me about when the politicians say, well, it's unfortunate that we have to increase the taxes, but there's just no other option. I said, that's like walking into your boss's office and saying, you know what, boss, I was paying my bills and I'm a little short, so there's only one alternative. You're going to have to give me a raise.
Yeah.
You know, there's an alternative.
There is another
There
alternative.
is
That's
another
right. It's called
alternative.
a door.
It's like when our president of the Cook County Board, Preckwinkle, when they did away with the beverage tax, and she said, "Well, we're going to have to lay a lot of people off." Well, that is kind of how it works. If you don't have the money, then you don't do it.
Yeah, they got a great line where they say government can't afford this. Government can't afford to lose this revenue.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, you
It's
know.
ironic.
What about the person who can't afford to pay this revenue?
And like
Yeah.
I said earlier, if the product that you were getting taxed for was legitimate, and you say, well, you know what, I mean, they're doing good things with my money, but it's the direct
It's
opposite.
the waste.
Yeah,
It's
right.
the amount of it that's just being wasted. And wasted on getting people reelected, among other things. It's just buying votes.
Yeah, and again, it's like our upcoming election for governor. Two multimillionaires running for governor, one Republican and one Democrat. I mean, is this the best we've got?
And look at how much money they have spent to get that job that pays what?
Oh, yeah, this pay is insignificant.
Sure.
Yeah,
Whatever they get paid,
JB,
200, 150,000, 200, whatever they get paid.
want
So
some
you can
power.
imagine what
It's the power,
you know what they want. They
Yeah.
want the power.
Yeah.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah, they said at one point, JB, I think it was 30,000 a day he was spending.
Oh,
Who
yeah,
was
he
it
spent
was
enormous
saying
amount
that
of
when
money.
he was a kid he had a paper route? What? There was one of them that said when he was a kid he had a paper route to help pay for the families.
His commercials, I mean,
I mean, if
you
you-
have to laugh at him. And when he talked about, he said, yes, in a very serious voice about how when he was growing up and his mother was afflicted with a disability, and somehow he just had to step in. Like he was opening boxes at Costco.
I think
We
we're
have-
talking about the same guy.
Excuse me at this point. We have a phone call. We have one of our many listeners has called in. I believe this is a call from a gentleman by the name of Ryan. I believe that's an
Who could that
Irish
be?
American name, is it
I
not?
think those get taxed too. Don't
His
they?
name is Ryan.
This
I believe
guy-
his name might be John Ryan.
This can't be the one and only John Ryan, is it?
Caller, can we hear from you?
John,
Yes.
Dan Ryan, Jack Ryan, Red Ryan, doesn't really matter.
There he is.
Just don't call me late for dinner,
We won't. We will not do that. At the next Meet the Historians dinner, we will not be late to call you.
Hey, you mean you guys started without me?
Oh, are you on your way?
Are you on your way? We'll do the show over.
I gotta-
We'll do the show over.
Since we had an extra day, I gotta stop by and pay my taxes,
Well, you've only missed 2 hours and 15 minutes of the show, so if you get here in the next 10 minutes, you can do the final farewell.
Jack, with all due respect to these guys, Kate really misses you.
That's right.
For our viewers, Kate is a canine member of our panel.
She don't talk too much, though.
The show mascot.
Yes. How are you doing, Jack? How's everything out where you are?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good.
We've been talking about the income tax and looking at the
Yeah, I
history of the
know.
income tax today.
Yeah.
Sound like
Was
you're
it the old saying that only two, was it death and taxes are the only,
Only two
Never
things that are
was in the
certain in
world.
life are death and taxes.
they charge taxes to bury you too.
I don't mind taking all my money as long as they, do it for, good topic, good subjects.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's what we were just talking about. If it was what we were paying for was a good return on our
causes.
money, yeah, right. We wouldn't mind it. But you look at what the situation is, and again, well, of course, their response to that is, well, if we only had more money, we could fix it.
I don't think people, certainly most people wouldn't object to what's spent on national defense or what's spent on law enforcement or even the national parks. I think people would support all that, maintaining our diplomats. But it's all the other things that government does that no one ever thought government would be doing that cause all the waste.
And
They're not
all
doing it and charging
all
us
the
for it.
years, the Constitution said that the duties of the federal government be limited and
Right.
and so stated, right?
That's right. And there are very
Well,
few people today
where
who
does
want
some of the
limited
stuff come in?
government in Washington. How are you feeling, Jack? How's everything? How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good, I guess. Pretty good shape for the shape I'm in. Good example. I mean, you got time for me to say something?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Okay, several years ago, one of the assistant priests, passed away at this parish, and they had the funeral mass, and right afterward there was a little coffee and downstairs at the hall before they actually went to the cemetery. So I wound up sitting with a gentleman who used to be in the parish at St. Daniel the Prophet. We call it St. Daniel the Prophet sometimes. But anyway, it turned out he is an attorney who works for the Department of Justice in the Illinois Office of the Prosecutor, the District Attorney of Illinois, Northern Illinois. And I asked him what sort of cases he had. Well, no, he was assigned out. They had a new study that the Department of Justice was conducting, using their personnel out there, about what was the origins of these gangs. Now, it sounded like there probably could be many other studies that have been done and organizations that are doing such. So don't you think they would be duplicating their services somewhere?
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, you would think so, but
Yeah.
well, I mean, I think somebody's
maybe
talking
it's,
about all the different.
These guys could be they're going to be prosecuting and making cases for really bad people.
Well, I mean, it's all the different departments, like you said. I mean, it's you're talking about
really bad
departments.
people,
you
what's her name? The lady with all these household stuff that wants to deal for the FBI.
oh, Martha
Excuse me?
Stewart. Martha Stewart. You're talking about Martha Stewart?
No, the lady. Remember, I can't think of her name now. I knew it if I tried to say it.
Yeah.
I must be getting old and senile now.
Yes. Not a good connection. So much time.
Again, you're talking about what the federal government spends their money on. You've been to Washington, D.C. I like when you walk around and you see these buildings. You've got this huge building that's the Department of Indian Affairs. Then you've got right next to it, you've got another huge building that are the Department of Southwest Indian Affairs, and then another building, the Department of Southwest Indian Affairs Arts and Music. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, Department of Departments.
What's that?
Martha Stewart, that's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
I think we've got we must have a bad connection.
It's a cell phone.
Oh, it's your cell phone.
Okay, I'll hang
Go to
up.
landphone.
I gotta go, guys.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Thanks for calling, Jack.
Yeah, thanks for calling.
Best wishes, Jack. Take
See you
care.
next
Take
month.
care.
That was our regular host, Jack Red Ryan, and we're glad to have a call from Jack Ryan. We will look forward to seeing him next month. we're in the final. We've got about another 10 minutes. So we've certainly done an extensive discussion today about taxes, income taxes, and the history of income taxes. Anything anyone else would like to say as a wind-up topic as we prepare to go off the air?
Well, I'd just touch on it. We're talking about con jobs and about the con job with the federal government does with people that don't think they paid any taxes because they got a small percentage of what they paid in back, and about the stupidity of the American people. It's something that I don't know why, but it really interests me is the whole Bernie Madoff situation. I mean, there's been movies about it and books written about it. And he is the classic example of a con man, and all the classic, first of all, well, I didn't think he was a con man because he didn't look like one, which is, if you look like a con man, you wouldn't give him your money. But one of the biggest things is the best for a con artist is for you not to ask him for money, but for him not to ask you for money, but for you to beg. And I read books in the
right.
And it's the classic. I really would like to take on another client, but I just can't. I just can't do it. There's no way. But Bernie, I'm a good friend of. He used to use the Jewish organizations. As a matter of fact, the one rabbi he said, "Now you're going to take care of my money." He says, "Oh, if I didn't take care of you, I wouldn't be invited to another bar mitzvah in New York." I mean, it was just a classic con man. But
they make you believe
right.
that they're doing you a favor by letting you in on the deal.
And the bottom line, if it looks too good to be true, it is.
Yeah.
The head whistleblower, he was on 60 Minutes, and they said he was an economist. I think he worked for some federal agency, and they asked him, when you looked at the scheme, how long did it take you to figure out that this was not legit? He said 5 minutes. 5 minutes. He said it would be the equivalent of someone in Major League Baseball batting 1,000, or getting a home run. But the thing that I really liked is he had two companies. One his sons were involved in, and then the other guy that ran the con job business. Now, they never invested anything. And again, that's another dead giveaway. There's no record of investments. But he said, and I thought it was funny, when the economy started going down the hill, down the drain, and the stock market started going down the drain, he said, "Bernie, why don't we just tell them that their money isn't in the stock market? We never even invested it." And I thought that
sure.
Yeah.
When we had the Illinois Bureau Racetrack Police, my boss was a retired Chicago copper, and he was in charge of the old Bunko squad.
Oh, yeah, right.
And Tom was a great guy, and he used to tell me some of the stories, and like there are no free lunches and blah blah blah, and that, and exactly the same thing. How long does it take you to get it? He says, "Bill," he says, "I know them immediately that they're trying to con." He says, "All I got to do is look them in the face." Tom was really
Bernie was given
guy.
12% interest, and the average at the time was maybe 3 or 4%. So I mean,
yeah.
It sounds too good to be true.
Yep.
It probably is.
It is, yeah.
Before we go off the air, I want to take a couple of minutes because I used to do a talk called 4 Days in April, and we've talked about a depressing topic of income taxes. 4 days in April, there are 3 of our greatest presidents connected with 3 successive days that just happened this past week. April the 12th, Franklin Delano Roosevelt died. April the 12th, 1945. He died at about 3:30 Chicago time down in Warm Springs, Georgia. April the 13th is Thomas Jefferson's birthday. Thomas Jefferson was born on April the 13th, 1743. And April the 14th, Abraham Lincoln, many consider our greatest president, was assassinated. He was shot in Ford's Theater on the evening of April the 14th. So 3 days in a row, 3 of our greatest presidents. And April the 15th, the 4th day in April, that's the day that the Titanic struck the iceberg in 1912. I don't know of any 4 days on the calendar in which so many momentous events took place as those 4 days in April. And as I mentioned, the Civil War began on April the 12th, the same day that FDR died. So a little bit of historical background on our Meet the Historians program. Tom McKenna, we thank Tom McKenna. Tom McKenna had to break away from us, but we thank him for joining us today, as always. And we've got a few minutes to go. Let me go around the table.
Well, I tell you, there was one more thing that happened in April. And I'm looking at him right now because Friday is John's birthday.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So happy birthday, John.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The 20th of April is my birthday.
Wow.
Thank you very much for remembering that.
And that's amazing because you don't look a day over 80.
I'm grateful to hear that. I'm certainly grateful to hear that. It's always good to hear compliments of
I'm
that type.
surprised John DeVita didn't have a cake here with with a.
If we were,
No, I just happened to think when you were talking about the, about the presidents and all the dates. It happened because I looked at my calendar this morning. I see Friday, April 20th is John's birthday, and I tell you, it's been a great pleasure knowing John.
Sure
John is left over from WJJG, and it's been just a pleasure for all the years that we've been friends. John, up at the studios with our good friend. Who was the old lady that was?
Judy Bartopinka.
Judy Bartopinka,
Judy,
yeah.
That was
And-
how I got started
yeah,
at WJJG.
And then you came with me in the morning on the morning show, and now over here at the Meet the Chicago Historian. So it's been a great pleasure to be associated with you, John.
Well, I thank you for that. I've enjoyed the association with you, John, and with all our good friends and colleagues here on the panel. Judy was the one that gave me the opportunity to substitute for her when she was state treasurer and state controller, and she had a weekly show at 4 in the afternoon, I believe, and I would come in and sit in when she was down in Springfield. And Judy was a good friend of mine, great lady. Tragic that she died when she did, because she was certainly one of the finest public officials
And every time
in our state.
every time she walked into the studio, I always got a kiss, and I never, and I still haven't washed my face yet where she kissed me.
Didn't she have a breakfast meeting in North Riverside?
We had what was called the West Suburban Executive Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
And they had really top flight people. I met Olivia. I always say Olivia de Havilland, who is now 101 years old.
Wow.
I always call her my close personal friend because I met Olivia de Havilland at the Breakfast Club, had my picture taken with her, which I have, got an autographed copy of Gone with the Wind signed by her.
What do you think brought her there to the Breakfast Club?
She was on the
Association with Judy?
lecture. She was on the lecture circuit.
Lecture circuit,
and
okay.
she gave a fascinating talk about Hollywood in the 30s and 40s and all that she had done with Errol Flynn and Warner Brothers. And she was really a great lady. I had a chance to talk, and so ever since then, I always refer to her as my close personal friend. She's still alive. She's 101 years old.
Wow.
She lives in Paris,
Yeah.
and she's doing fine. And she's the only star from that era who is still alive. She's the only actor or actress who was a big star before World War II, who is still. She was a big box office star before the war, and she's still alive.
Came out of the studio.
The other two were Mickey Rooney
Right.
and Shirley Temple, and
I
they're
got-
both gone. So
I got
now
to
she's the only
meet
one left.
Mickey Rooney a couple times because he was a good friend with Henry Ford.
Oh yeah, because of the Thomas Edison's film. that he
Right.
did. I met Mickey Rooney too. I had a chance to meet Mickey Rooney.
And if you
But-
called him Mickey, he wouldn't pay it. If you called him Mr. Rooney,
I called him Mr. Rooney, and I got
and
his
he would-
autograph.
He would
Yeah.
respond to you.
Yeah, he was very cordial. What a subsequent show, I'll talk about that. But it's great to be with you. Great being on Meet the Chicago Historians, and I thank John for acknowledging my birthday. And we hope all of you out in the audience. We hope that maybe by the time we gather again in May, we'll actually have something resembling spring.
Yes.
There may be flowers blooming and grass to cut, and people will be complaining about that and wishing the weather was cool again. So
Or decorum.
people in the Chicago area are never satisfied.
August.
Any wind-up comments? We've got a minute or so if anybody
that's
would
May
like to.
21st is our next.
That's right.
That's right.
Monday,
Not
May
late.
the 21st. And we'll be back here. We hope you've enjoyed listening to our tax forum today, our discussion of the federal income tax and its history, with a little bit of the news of the day at the beginning of the show. And we're always glad to be here. We're glad to have this opportunity to talk about history and have an assemblage of such distinguished Chicago historians.
Right.
So,
Again, April 28th, Saturday, Fire Museum of Greater Chicago from 10 to 2 o'clock. We will be open, and we wish you would come. Bring your kids, bring a camera, and see the history of the Chicago Fire Department.
Yeah.
Kids have a great
Right.
they have a great time. Great time.
And on June 16th, they're going to have a fire muster at the Fire Academy
Exactly.
with antique and current
Oh.
fire equipment, and they'll have a flea market also.
Right.
What's the date on that again?
June 16th.
16th,
the
that's a
day
Saturday?
before- it's a Saturday before Father's Day.
I have attended that events many times in the past. John DeVita is always he sets up all the public address system for them.
Right.
You get to see the place on DeKoven Street where
fire
the
started.
Chicago fire began. Mrs. O'Leary's cow was right at or near that site where the Chicago Fire Academy
Right.
is. And I think that's the only place where DeKoven Street still exists.
Yes,
There's-
it is.
If you go north, there's a couple one-block streets that are in the same place, and they're the same size.
Right. Right. DeKoven.
But
Bill, very quickly, explain what happened last Saturday down at the Academy.
Yes, last Saturday at the Chicago Fire Academy, the monument to the retired firefighters was dedicated. I would think that there had to be 1,000 people there.
Very good.
These two gals that set it up are retired paramedics, and they worked their tails off on this, and it was really something to see. If you get down in that neighborhood, you will see the monument. It's right outside, and you're welcome to visit and look up maybe your grandfather or your uncle or whoever. His name is on there. It's quite an astonishing looking eyesight to see. He
And-
did a great job, just an absolute great job.
The names
And,
of all the Chicago firefighters? Or?
if not all, but you had to have your name put on. You had to contact these gals.
I see. Okay.
Right.
And
okay.
have your name put
you could,
on
you
there.
could contribute to have your,
Right,
your family.
right.
I understand.
And the
Then they
Fire
came out
Museum
with a
does the
great
same
idea.
service too. I mean, if you have a person, a relative that worked for the fire department, through mostly Kenny Little's 4 books, and they have who worked for them and what companies they were working for and how long they
great.
worked. And the Fire Museum does that also.
Okay.
Yes. But
And-
this is strictly the monument to the retired.
Oh, okay.
We don't know what's going to happen in the future. There, it seems that there's a movement to replace the fire academy and the police academy, move them to Chicago Avenue,
Right.
out on the west side. So we'll have to, dig this thing up and move it along with it.
Right.
And it's a shame because it just is outstanding where it is
Right.
against that red brick building. It's really
That
something for a visitor from
Right.
out of town to come in and
and
see.
it has historical relevance too, because that's the actual spot where the fire started.
Yes, yeah, that's where the academy is.
Right.
Easy to get to.
Okay,
Right.
well, we thank you all very much, and this brings us to a close of our April edition, so I'll turn it over to our announcer, Rich Lang.
We wish to thank Heaven of Jack FM, WRHS 89.7 FM, for broadcasting our shows over the Ridgewood Radio Network. Recordings of previous Meet the Chicago Historians programs are available for your listening pleasure by way of the internet at www.windycityhometown.com. We also want to thank the executive producer of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, John Sakanda. On behalf of everyone associated with our Historians program, we thank you for listening. And next month, hopefully, we'll be in, if not summer, a great spring day. This is your announcer, Rich Lang. So long until next time.
You have been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians from the John DeVita Broadcast Center on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, April the 16th, the year 2018. Today's broadcast was produced by Jack Ryan, directed by John DeVita, and our special thanks to the executive producer of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, Mr. John Chikanda. Until next time, friends, please be safe, and thanks for listening.